The glass towers of downtown reflected the morning sun like mirrors of judgment, and nowhere was this more fitting than at Blackwood Industries. On the 42nd floor, behind mahogany doors that had witnessed more tears than triumphs, sat Roman Blackwood. His reputation preceded him like a storm cloud, dark and foreboding. Helena Martinez, HR manager, sat across from her assistant with a look of defeat that had become permanent over the past 6 months. "Another one quit," she announced, sliding a resignation letter across the desk at secretary number 12 this year. The assistant, a young man named Tom, barely looked up from his computer. How long did this one last? 2 weeks and 3 days? She cited impossible working conditions and psychological trauma in her resignation. Roman Blackwood had built his empire on precision, excellence, and an absolute intolerance for mediocrity. At 34, he commanded respect through fear rather than admiration. His steel-gray eyes could freeze a boardroom with a single glance, and his voice carried the weight of authority that made grown men tremble. The secretaries came and went, like seasons, each believing they could be the one to tame the beast. They arrived with confidence and departed with therapy recommendations. Mrs. Patterson had held the record at 3 weeks, but she'd developed a nervous tic that made her jump every time the phone rang. The desperate search 3 floors below. In a coffee shop that had become her temporary office, Olivia Rose stared at her laptop screen with growing desperation. Rejection email after rejection email filled her inbox. Each one was a polite variation of "thank you for your interest, but we've decided to pursue other candidates." At 26, Olivia had dreams bigger than her bank account. She wanted to be a writer, to craft stories that would move people and change minds. But dreams didn't pay rent. Her landlord had made it clear that inspiration wasn't legal tender. Her friend Rachel slid into the seat across from her, carrying 2 steaming cups. "Any luck today?" Olivia shook her head, accepting the coffee. "Gratefully, I'm starting to think I'm cursed. Even the receptionist position at that dental office went to someone else." "What about that posting for Blackwood Industries? Executive assistant position? Are you insane?" Olivia nearly choked on her coffee. "That's Roman Blackwood. He's legendary for destroying assistants. I heard he made one woman cry so hard she had to be hospitalized for dehydration." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like an exaggeration." "Trust me, it's not. Besides, I'd never get the job anyway. I have 0 corporate experience." But as Olivia looked at her dwindling savings account and the stack of unpaid bills in her purse, desperation began to outweigh fear. Maybe, just maybe, she could be different. Maybe she could survive where others had failed. The application that evening. In her small apartment with its leaky faucet and temperamental heating, Olivia crafted what she knew might be her last job. Application. She poured her heart into the cover letter, writing with the same passion she brought to her stories. "Dear Mr. Blackwood," she began, "I understand you're looking for an executive assistant. I also understand that this position comes with unique challenges. While I may not have traditional corporate experience, I have something more valuable: the ability to adapt, learn, and persevere under pressure." She went on to describe her freelance writing work, her ability to manage multiple deadlines, and her experience dealing with difficult clients. What she didn't mention was her tendency to be clumsy when nervous, her habit of speaking before thinking, or her complete inability to navigate office politics. At midnight, she hit send and immediately regretted it. But it was too late to take back her application to work for the most feared man in the city. The call came at 7 in the morning. 3 days later, Olivia was still in her pajamas, half asleep and completely unprepared. "Ms. Rose? This is Helena Martinez from Blackwood Industries. Mr. Blackwood would like to schedule an interview for the executive assistant position." Olivia nearly dropped the phone. "He wants to interview me? Can you be here at 2 o'clock today?" "Today?" Olivia's voice cracked. Yes, absolutely. I'll be there." As she hung up, reality crashed over her like a cold wave. She was going to interview with Roman Blackwood. She was either very brave or very stupid, and at this point, the distinction didn't matter. The preparation. Olivia spent the morning in a frenzy of preparation. She borrowed a conservative black suit from her sister, practiced walking in heels. She'd rarely worn and rehearsed answers to potential questions, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of Blackwood Industries. The building was a monument to success and intimidation. The lobby gleamed with polished marble and modern art that probably cost more than most people's salaries. Employees, moved with purpose and fear, their conversations conducted in hushed tones, as if speaking too loudly might summon their terrifying boss at the reception desk. A woman with perfect posture and a practiced smile directed her to the elevators. 42nd floor? Helena Martinez will meet you there. The elevator ride felt like an eternity. Olivia checked her reflection in the polished steel doors, trying to tame a stubborn curl that had escaped her carefully constructed bun. Her palms were sweating, and she could feel her heart beating against her ribs like a trapped bird. The collision. Elevator doors opened to reveal a hallway that screamed expensive taste and quiet efficiency. Olivia stepped out, immediately overwhelmed by the hushed atmosphere and the weight of expectation that seemed to hang in the air like incense. She was so focused on not tripping in her borrowed heels that she didn't notice the man striding toward her until it was too late. The collision was inevitable, and physics dictated that her large coffee would find its target with unerring accuracy. The steaming liquid splashed across an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, staining the crisp white shirt beneath. Time seemed to freeze as Olivia watched the dark stains spread across the expensive fabric, her brain struggling to process the magnitude of her mistake. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she gasped, fumbling in her purse for tissues that she knew wouldn't be adequate for this disaster. "I'm such an idiot. Let me help you clean that." When she finally looked up, she found herself staring into the most intense gray eyes she'd ever seen. They belonged to a man who was devastatingly handsome in a way that made her breath catch. Despite the fury she could see building in his expression. "I assume you're here for the interview?" he said, his voice carrying an arctic chill that made her shiver. "You're Roman Blackwood," she said, the words falling from her lips like stones into still water. "Indeed I am. And you are." Olivia rose. "Your worst nightmare, apparently." Something flickered across his features. Surprise, maybe, or annoyance. It was impossible to tell with a man who seemed to have been carved from stone. "Follow me," he commanded, turning on his heel and striding toward a set of double doors at the end of the hallway. The interview room's office was a study in controlled power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city, while the furniture was arranged to create subtle psychological advantages. Everything was designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. But Olivia was too flustered to be intimidated by the decor. She was too busy trying to figure out how to salvage what had to be the worst job interview in history. "Sit," Roman instructed, settling behind his massive desk with movements that were both fluid and precise. Olivia perched on the edge of the chair, her posture rigid with nervousness. "Mr. Blackwood, I want to apologize again for the coffee incident. I know first impressions are important, and I've obviously failed spectacularly." "Why should I hire you?" he asked, ignoring her apology entirely. The question caught her off guard. She'd expected anger, dismissal, maybe even security being called. She hadn't expected him to proceed with the interview as if nothing had happened. "Because I'm not easily intimidated," she said, the words coming out before she could stop them. "And because I won't quit after 2 weeks like all the others." His eyebrows rose slightly. "You know about my previous assistants?" "Everyone knows about your previous assistants. The question is, do you know why they all left?" It was a bold question, bordering on insolent, but something in his expression made her continue. "They left because they were trying to be perfect, and perfect isn't sustainable." "I'm not perfect, Mr. Blackwood. I spill coffee, I speak my mind, and I make mistakes. But I also learn from them, and I don't give up." Roman leaned back in his chair, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes. "What makes you think you're different? Because I need this job more than I fear you." The admission hung between them like a confession. Olivia immediately regretted her honesty, but she couldn't take the words back now. "I need someone who can handle pressure," Roman said finally. "Someone who won't crumble under criticism or run crying to HR every time." I raised my voice. "I can handle pressure. I've been handling it my whole life. The hours are long, the work is demanding. Expect perfection in execution, even if you claim not to be perfect yourself." "I understand." "Do you?" He stood up, moving around the desk to stand directly in front of her. Because 12 women have sat in that exact chair claiming they understood, only to quit within a month. Olivia rose to face him, her chin lifting defiantly. Then maybe you weren't asking the right questions. What questions should I be asking? Ask me if I'm willing to work late nights to get the job done. Ask me if I can handle criticism without taking it personally. Ask me if I'm smart enough to learn your preferences and organized enough to anticipate your needs. Can you? Yes, I can, and I will. Roman studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. You start Monday, 8 o'clock sharp. Don't be late. Olivia blinked, certain she'd misheard. I'm sorry, what? You're hired, Miss Rose? Try not to spill anything else on your way out. The first day Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Olivia stood outside the Blackwood Industries building at 7:45, clutching a travel mug of coffee with a secure lid, and trying to calm her racing heart. She'd spent the weekend researching everything she could about Roman Blackwood and his company. What she'd found painted a picture of a man who was brilliant, ruthless, and completely dedicated to his work. He'd built his empire from nothing, transforming a small investment firm into a multinational corporation through sheer force of will and an unwavering commitment to excellence. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt different this time. She was no longer a nervous applicant. She was Roman Blackwood's new assistant. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. Helena Martinez met her at the elevator with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. So, you're the one who survived the coffee incident, she said, leading Olivia to a desk positioned strategically outside Roman's office. Survived is a strong word, Olivia replied. I'm still not sure what happened. What happened, Helena said, is that you're the first person in 6 months to stand up to him instead of cowering. He respects strength, even when it comes in an unconventional package. The desk was equipped with everything she could possibly need. A state-of-the-art computer, multiple phone lines, and a stack of files that looked intimidating enough to fell a small tree. Helena spent the next hour explaining the systems, the protocols, and the countless ways she could accidentally trigger Roman's wrath. He drinks his coffee black, no sugar, takes lunch at his desk unless he has a client meeting, hates interruptions. During his morning review, which happens from 8 to 9:30, and whatever you do, never ever reschedule a meeting without his explicit approval. At exactly 8 o'clock, Roman strode through the office doors like a force of nature. He was immaculate in a navy suit that probably cost more than Olivia's rent, his dark hair perfectly styled, and his expression set in its default mode of controlled intensity. Ms. Rose, he said without breaking stride. My office. Now. The first Testramon's office felt different in the morning light. The city spread out below them like a conquered territory, and the man behind the desk seemed to survey it all with the satisfaction of a general reviewing his troops. Your first task, he said, sliding a thick file across the desk, is to organize the Morrison account. Everything is in chaos, and I need it sorted by lunch. Olivia opened the file and immediately understood why his previous assistants had quit. The contents were a nightmare of mixed-up contracts, scattered correspondence, and financial documents that seemed to have been arranged by someone with a vendetta against organization. Any questions? Roman asked, his tone suggesting that questions were strongly discouraged. Just one, Olivia said, meeting his gaze steadily. Do you want me to just organize this, or do you want me to fix the problems I find? Something shifted in his expression. What problems? Well, from what I can see in the first few pages, there are 3 different contract versions with conflicting terms, 2 sets of financial projections that don't match, and what appears to be a missing addendum that's referenced but not included. Roman's eyes narrowed. And you noticed this in 30 seconds? I notice things. It's what I do. Fix it, he said. All of it? And Ms. Rose? Yes, impress me. As Olivia returned to her desk with the file, she felt a familiar thrill of challenge. This was exactly the kind of puzzle she loved solving, the kind of problem that made her mind race with possibilities. She settled into her chair, cracked her knuckles, and got to work. By lunch, she had not only organized the Morrison account, but had also identified 7 significant issues that could have cost the company Millions, if left unchecked. She'd prepared a detailed summary of her findings, complete with recommendations for resolution. When she knocked on Roman's door at exactly noon, she found him on a conference call. He gestured for her to enter and placed the file on his desk. Never breaking his conversation about quarterly projections and market analysis, as he concluded his call, Olivia watched him open the file with the same expression he might wear a while. Diffusing a bomb? His eyes moved across the pages with increasing intensity, and she saw the moment when surprise replaced skepticism. "You found all of this in 4 hours?" he asked, looking up at her with something that might have been respect. "I found it in the first hour," she admitted. "I spent the other 3 hours double-checking and preparing solutions." Roman leaned back in his chair, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes. "Ms. Rose, I think this might be the beginning of a very interesting working relationship." For the first time since she'd walked into his office, Olivia smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that, Mr. Blackwood." As she left his office, she caught a glimpse of something in his expression that she hadn't expected to see. Wasn't just professional approval or grudging respect. It was the look of a man who had just realized that his carefully ordered world was about to be turned upside down. And despite all the warnings, all the horror stories, and all the reasons she should be terrified, Olivia found herself looking forward to tomorrow. 3 weeks had passed since Olivia's chaotic first day, and the office had settled into an unexpected rhythm. The whispered conversations about how long she would last had gradually given way. 2 curious observations about the changes happening on the 42nd floor. Roman still arrived at exactly 8 o'clock each morning, but now he found his coffee waiting at the perfect temperature, his schedule organized with surgical precision, and his correspondence sorted by priority. More importantly, he found solutions to problems he hadn't even realized existed. Olivia had developed an almost supernatural ability to anticipate his needs. She could tell by the set of his shoulders when he was about to explode at an incompetent vendor, and she'd already have alternative options researched and ready. When he worked late, she stayed late, ensuring that everything he might require was within reach. But it wasn't just her efficiency that had begun to crack his carefully constructed walls. It was the way she treated him like a human being rather than a force of nature. "Mr. Blackwood," she said one Tuesday morning, placing a stack of contracts on his desk along with his usual black coffee. "I took the liberty of rescheduling your 3 o'clock with Peterson Industries." Roman looked up sharply. "I specifically told you never to reschedule meetings without my approval." "You did," she agreed calmly. "But Peterson's CFO called this morning to inform us that their CEO is in the hospital with appendicitis. They wanted to reschedule anyway. I moved it to Thursday at 10, which gives you time to review the additional financial reports I requested from their accounting department." Roman stared at her for a moment, his prepared lecture dying on his lips. "You requested additional reports. The preliminary numbers seemed optimistic. I thought you'd want to see the breakdown before committing to anything." "And if I hadn't wanted those reports?" Olivia smiled, the expression transforming her face from merely pretty to genuinely radiant. "Then I would have looked foolish, and you would have reminded me that thinking ahead of my position isn't part of my job description." "It isn't," he said, but there was no heat in his voice. "No, but preventing you from making decisions based on incomplete information is." Roman found himself fighting back what might have been a smile. This woman continued to surprise him at every turn. The late-night revelations. It was nearly 10 o'clock on a Thursday when Olivia noticed the light still burning in Roman's office. The rest of the floor had emptied hours ago, leaving them alone. In the hushed atmosphere of the after-hours business world, she knocked softly on his door. Carrying a fresh cup of coffee and a sandwich from the deli downstairs. "You missed dinner again?" Roman looked up from the sea of documents spread across his desk, his usually perfect hair slightly disheveled from running his hands through it. "I didn't ask for food, no, but you haven't eaten since the granola bar you had at lunch, and that was 8 hours ago." She set the sandwich and coffee within reach. "Even machines need fuel, Mr. Blackwood." "I'm not a machine," he said, the words coming out more defensively than he'd intended. "No," she agreed, settling into the chair across from his desk without invitation. "You're not. But sometimes you act like you think you should be." Roman studied her face in the soft lighting of his desk lamp. What makes you an expert on what I should or shouldn't be? Not an expert on anything, Olivia said honestly. But I'm a good observer. And what I observe is a man who's forgotten. That success means nothing if you don't have anyone to share it with. The words hung between them like a challenge. Roman felt something crack inside his chest, a fissure in the armor he'd spent years perfecting. You don't know anything about my life, he said quietly. You're right. I don't know about your life. Outside these walls, but I know that you arrive before anyone else and leave after everyone's gone. I know that you work weekends and holidays. I know that in the 3 weeks I've been here, no one has called you just to see how you're doing. Roman's jaw tightened. Prefer it that way, do you? She asked gently. Or is it just easier than risking disappointment? The question hit him, like a physical blow. For a moment, he saw himself through her eyes, a man who had built walls so high that even he couldn't see over them anymore. Why do you care? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Because beneath all that ice, I see someone worth caring about. The confession the following week brought the annual shareholders meeting, an event that typically transformed Roman into an even more demanding version of himself. But this year, with Olivia orchestrating the details, everything ran with unprecedented smoothness. As the last shareholder filed out of the conference room, Roman loosened his tie and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The presentation had been flawless, the questions anticipated and answered, the financial projections received with enthusiasm. That was brilliant, Olivia said, appearing at his elbow with a glass of water and a look of genuine pride. You commanded that room like you were born to it. It was adequate, he replied, but she could see the pleasure in his eyes. It was more than adequate, and you know it. She began gathering the scattered papers and presentation materials. You should celebrate. I don't celebrate. When was the last time you did something just because it made you happy? The question stopped him cold. He tried to remember, searching through years of achievements and acquisitions, board meetings, and business dinners. But every memory was tied to work, to success, to the relentless pursuit of more. I can't remember, he admitted. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard. There was no pity in her voice, just a gentle sorrow that made his chest tighten. She continued cleaning up around him, her movements efficient, but somehow comforting. Olivia, he said suddenly, using her first name for the first time since she'd started working for him. She looked up, surprised by the change in his tone. Would you like to have dinner with me? Not for work, he added quickly. Just dinner. Her smile was like sunrise after a long winter. I'd like that very much. The dinner the restaurant Roman chose was elegant without being ostentatious. The kind of place where conversations could happen without interruption. Olivia had changed from her conservative work attire into a simple blue dress that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes. I realize I know very little about you, Roman said as they settled into their seats. Beyond your impressive organizational skills and your apparent immunity to intimidation, what would you like to know? Everything, he said, then seemed surprised by his own honesty, so she told him. About growing up in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, about her dreams of becoming a writer and the rejection letters that had piled up like autumn leaves, about her father who'd worked 3 jobs to put her through college, and her mother who still called every Sunday to make sure she was eating enough vegetables. They sound wonderful, Roman said, and there was a wistfulness in his voice that made her heart ache. They are. What about your family? His expression shuddered immediately. There's not much to say. There's always something to say. Roman was quiet for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. My father built this company from nothing. He was brilliant, driven, absolutely focused on success. He was also incapable of showing affection to anyone, including his only son. And your mother? She died when I was 12. Cancer. He took a sip of wine, his hand steady despite the emotion in his voice. After that, it was just my father and me, and he made it clear that feelings were a luxury we couldn't afford. Olivia reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. No. The touch was gentle, comforting, and it sent electricity racing through his veins. I'm sorry, she said simply. It made me strong. It made you lonely. The truth of her words hit him like a sledgehammer. He'd been lonely for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to crave human connection. Yes, he admitted. It did. The awakening after dinner, they walked slowly through the city streets, neither wanting the evening to end. The night air was cool, and Olivia had forgotten her jacket. Without thinking, Roman shrugged out of his suit coat and draped it over her shoulders. "Thank you," she said, pulling the fabric closer around her. It smelled like him, expensive cologne, mixed with something uniquely masculine that made her pulse quicken. "Olivia," he said, as they paused outside her apartment building. "Tonight was perfect. It was just dinner." "No," he said, turning to face her fully. "It was the first time in years that I felt like myself instead of the role I play." She looked up at him, seeing past the perfect features and expensive clothes to the man underneath. "Who are you when you're not Roman Blackwood, CEO?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I've been playing that role for so long, I'm not sure there's anything else left." "There is," she said with quiet certainty. "I've seen glimpses of him. It's kind. And funny and brilliant in ways that have nothing to do with business." Roman felt something shift inside him, like tectonic plates rearranging themselves. This woman saw him in ways no one ever had, ways he'd forgotten were possible. "You're dangerous," he said softly. "Why?" "Because you make me want things I gave up hoping for a long time ago." The space between them seemed to shrink until they were standing close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, close enough that when he reached up to cup her cheek, she leaned into the touch, like a flower turning toward the sun. "What kind of things?" she whispered. "You," he said. "Simply, I want you." The next morning arrived with an awkwardness that could have cut glass. Olivia sat at her desk, trying to focus on scheduling Roman's appointments, while her mind replayed every moment of their dinner. Every word they'd shared, and especially those final moments outside her apartment when the world had narrowed down. To just the two of them, they hadn't kissed. They'd stood there, breathing the same air, hearts racing in synchronization, till the spell had been broken by a passing taxi, and they'd both stepped back like teenagers caught by their parents. Roman emerged from his office at exactly 9 o'clock, looking as impeccable as always. But Olivia noticed the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes didn't quite meet hers when he spoke. "I need the Morrison contracts reviewed by noon," he said, his tone deliberately professional. "Of course, Mr. Blackwood." The formal address hung between them like a wall they'd both decided to rebuild overnight. But Olivia wasn't about to let him retreat completely. "I enjoyed last night," she said quietly, when no one else was around to hear. Roman paused in the doorway of his office. "So did I, but you're regretting it." He turned to face her, and she saw the war playing out in his expression. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. "I'm questioning the wisdom of it." "Why?" "Because you work for me. Because I'm your boss. Because mixing business with personal feelings is a recipe for disaster. Or it's a recipe for happiness," she countered. "You can't know which until you try. I've built everything I have by avoiding unnecessary risks. And what if this isn't unnecessary? What if this is the most necessary risk you've ever taken?" The business trip to days later, Roman announced that they would be traveling to Chicago for a crucial client presentation. The trip was legitimate business, but Olivia couldn't help wondering if he was testing himself. Testing them by putting them in close quarters away from the familiar boundaries of their office. The flight was professional, cordial, and absolutely torturous. They sat side by side in first class, their arms occasionally brushing as they worked on laptops. Each touch sending sparks through the careful distance they were trying to maintain. At the hotel, there was a mix-up with the reservations. Instead of 2 separate rooms, they found themselves with adjoining suites connected by a door that neither of them mentioned but both were acutely aware of. The client dinner went flawlessly. Roman presented their proposal with his usual commanding presence, while Olivia provided seamless support, anticipating his needs and smoothly handling the technical details. They worked together like dancers who'd been partnered for years, each knowing instinctively how to complement the other. "Impressive team," the client remarked to Roman as the evening wound down. "Your assistant is clearly more than just an assistant." "Yes," Roman said, his eyes finding Olivia across the room where she was organizing the contracts they'd just signed. She is. Back at the hotel, they found themselves alone in the elevator, the silence thick with unspoken tension. Olivia's suite was on the 15th floor, Roman's on the 16th, but when the elevator stopped at 15, neither of them moved. Olivia, Roman said, his voice rough with restraint. I know, she said softly. You can't. We can't. It's complicated. It's not complicated, he said, surprising her. It's terrifying. The elevator doors started to close, and Olivia reached out to stop them. And instead of stepping out, she pressed the button for the 16th floor. What are you doing? Roman asked. Something I've wanted to do since the moment I spilled coffee on you, she said, turning to face him fully. I'm choosing you over fear. The confession of hearts in Roman's suite, with the city lights twinkling below them, all pretense finally fell away. They stood facing each other across the elegant sitting room, the weight of weeks of careful distance and mounting attraction filling the space between them. Tell me you don't feel this, Olivia said, her voice steady despite the way her heart was hammering against her ribs. Tell me that every moment we spend together doesn't make you want more. I can't tell you that, Roman said, his carefully controlled facade cracking, because it would be a lie. Then stop fighting it. You don't understand, he said, running his hands through his hair. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be what you deserve. What I deserve, she said, moving closer as someone who sees me for who I really am. Someone who challenges me and supports me and isn't afraid of what we could become together. I am afraid, he admitted. I'm terrified that I'll ruin this. Ruin you, the way I ruin everything that matters. You won't. How can you be so sure? Guess, she said, reaching up to frame his face with her hands. I see who you are underneath all that armor. And that man is worth loving. The word hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Roman's breath caught in his throat as he searched her eyes, looking for any sign of doubt or hesitation. He found none. Olivia, he whispered, her name like a prayer on his lips. I love you, she said simply. Not your money, not your power, not your position. You. The man who works until midnight because he cares, so deeply about doing things right. The man who remembers how I take my coffee and makes sure I eat when I'm too busy to remember. The man who's been protecting his heart for so long that he's forgotten how beautiful it is when he lets someone see it. Something inside Roman shattered and reformed in the space of a heartbeat. Years of careful control, of emotional discipline, of keeping himself separate from everyone around him, it all crumbled beneath the weight of her love. I love you too, he said, the words feeling foreign and perfect on his tongue. I love your stubborn determination and your brilliant mind. I love the way you make everything better just by being there. I love that you're not afraid of me, even when I'm afraid of myself. The union of souls when Roman kissed her. It was with all the passion he'd been holding back, all the longing he'd tried to deny. Olivia melted into him, her body fitting against his, like they were two pieces of the same puzzle, finally finding their place. Are you sure about this? He asked against her lips, giving her one last chance to step back from the precipice they were approaching. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, she said, and then there were no more words, only the language of touch and breath and hearts beating in perfect synchronization. He carried her to the bedroom with a tenderness that contradicted his powerful frame, laying her down on the bed like she was something precious and fragile.
Oh.
But when she pulled him down to her, her touch was anything but fragile. It was sure. And demanding and full of the same hunger that had been building between them for weeks. They explored each other with reverent hands and whispered endearments, mapping the geography of desire and discovering that physical intimacy was only the beginning of what they could share. In the joining of their bodies, they found the joining of their souls, to people who had been incomplete finally becoming whole. Roman had never known that love could be both gentle and fierce, tender and consuming. Every touch from Olivia rewrote his understanding of what it meant to be truly connected to another person. For Olivia, making love with Roman was like coming home to a place she'd never been, but had always been searching for. He was passionate and considerate, powerful and vulnerable, and she felt herself falling even deeper in love with every kiss, every caress, every whispered word of devotion. The new dawn, they woke tangled together as sunlight streamed through the windows, and for a moment, Roman felt a flutter of panic. In the harsh light of morning, Would the magic of the night before seem like a mistake? But then Olivia stirred in his arms, smiled up at him with sleepy contentment, and pressed a soft kiss to his chest, right over his heart. The panic dissolved, replaced by a peace he'd never experienced before. "Good morning," she murmured against his skin. "Is it?" he asked, genuine uncertainty in his voice. She lifted her head to look at him properly. "Having second thoughts already?" "I'm having thoughts I've never had before," he admitted. "Wondering what this means for us, for work, for everything." "It means," she said, sitting up and letting the sheet fall away from her beautiful body, "that we figure it out together, one day at a time. People will talk. Let them talk. It could affect your career. My career is what I make of it, not what other people think of it." Roman reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, marveling at how natural the gesture felt. "How did I get so lucky? Spilled coffee on yourself," she said with a grin that made his heart flip over in his chest. "You spilled coffee on me?" "Details," she laughed, and the sound was better than any music he'd ever heard. The return home, the flight back to New York, was different from the journey out. They still maintained professional boundaries in public, but now there was an undercurrent of intimate knowledge, of shared secrets, and whispered promises. Roman found himself catching glimpses of Olivia throughout the day and remembering the way she'd looked in his arms, the sounds she'd made when he touched her in just the right way. Olivia. For her part, was discovering that being in love with Roman Blackwood was even more intoxicating than she'd imagined. Knowing that beneath his controlled exterior was a man who loved her with fierce devotion made every mundane moment feel charged with possibility. When they returned to the office, they slipped back into their professional roles with practiced ease. But now their efficiency came from a deeper understanding, an almost telepathic connection that made them even more formidable as a team. Helena noticed immediately. "Something's different about you two," she observed when Olivia stopped by her office to drop off some paperwork. "Different how?" Olivia asked, trying to keep her expression neutral. "You're both happy. I mean, you were professional before, but now there's this energy. Like you're both part of some wonderful secret." Olivia couldn't suppress her smile. "Maybe we are." The public declaration. It was 3 weeks after Chicago when Roman made his decision. He was reviewing quarterly reports when he looked up to find Olivia organizing his schedule for the following week. Her brow furrowed in concentration as she worked. The afternoon sun caught the highlights in her hair, and he was struck by how naturally she belonged in his space, in his life. He'd spent weeks worrying about the professional implications of their relationship, but watching her now, he realized that she made him better at everything, including his job. "Olivia," he said, and something in his tone made her look up immediately. "Yes, have dinner with me tonight. Somewhere public, somewhere people will see us together." She set down her pen, understanding immediately what he was really asking. "Are you sure? I'm tired of hiding how I feel about you. I'm tired of pretending that you're just my assistant when you're so much more than that. People will definitely talk. Let them talk. I love you, and I'm not ashamed of that. I don't want to be." Olivia's smile was radiant. "In that case, Mr. Blackwood, I would be delighted to have dinner with you." The conference room was packed with shareholders, reporters, and industry analysts, all waiting to hear Roman Blackwood's annual address. But this year, there was an addition to the usual agenda that had everyone buzzing with curiosity. Roman took the podium with his characteristic confidence, but those who knew him well could see the difference in him. The cold distance that had once defined him had been replaced by something warmer, more human. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "this has been our most successful year in company history. Revenue is up 30%. We've expanded into 5 new markets, and client satisfaction has reached an all-time high." He paused, his eyes finding Olivia in the front row. She was no longer just his assistant. She'd been promoted to Director of Communications, a role that utilized her writing, talents, and strategic thinking. But more than that, she was his partner in every sense of the word. "This success," Roman continued, "is due in large part to the exceptional team we've built here at Blackwood Industries. But I want to take a moment to acknowledge someone who has transformed not just our company culture, but my own understanding of what true partnership means." Olivia's eyes widened as Roman stepped away from the podium and walked directly to her. The room fell silent as he dropped to one knee in front of her chair, pulling a ring box from his jacket pocket. Olivia rose, he said, his voice carrying. Clearly through the microphone he still wore, you walked into my life like a force of nature, spilling coffee and challenging every assumption I had about what was possible. You've made me a better man, a better leader, and a better human being. Tears streamed down Olivia's face as she looked down at the man who had once seemed so untouchable, now vulnerable and open before a room full of strangers. You taught me that love isn't a weakness, it's the greatest strength we can possess. You showed me that the best partnerships are built on trust, respect, and the willingness to grow together. Olivia, will you marry me? The room held its collective breath as Olivia slipped from her chair to kneel in front of Roman, framing his face with her hands. You beautiful, impossible, wonderful man, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Yes. Yes, of course. Yes. Of course. Yes. Room erupted in applause as Roman slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her with all the passion and devotion that had been building between them since that first disastrous encounter. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying, Roman helped her to her feet and spoke into the microphone one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to announce that Blackwood Industries will be gaining a new partner in every sense of the word. And I can promise you that our best days are still ahead of us. As the crowd cheered and cameras flashed, Olivia leaned close to Roman's ear. You know, she whispered, this is definitely going to be the most talked about shareholders meeting in company history. Roman's laugh was rich and full of joy. Let them talk, he said, echoing her words from that night in Chicago. I love you, Mrs. Soon-to-be Blackwood. I love you too, she replied. My beautiful, impossible, wonderful husband-to-be. And as they stood together, surrounded by the company Roman had built and the life they were building together, both of them knew that sometimes the best things in life came from the most unexpected collisions. The woman who had lasted only a month was nowhere to be found. In her place stood a woman who would last a lifetime. Not because she had survived Roman Blackwood's impossible standards, but because she had seen past them to the man underneath and chosen to love him completely. And Roman, who had spent years believing that love was a luxury he couldn't afford, discovered that it was actually the one thing he couldn't live without. Their story had begun with spilled coffee and wounded pride. It continued with late nights and gradual understanding. And it would go on forever with love, laughter, the unshakable knowledge that some collisions are really just fate wearing a disguise.